Welcome everyone. My name is Bruce Tamlyn. I'm the former chaplain here at Silver Bay, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for joining us. We're here, Austin Porth, who's our media digital specialist at Silver Bay. He and I are in the Trinity Library, Trinity House Library, on this absolutely gorgeous late October day. It's 72 degrees out and almost enough to swim in today. We might get in for a little swim. So yes, I'm so grateful for Austin for being a part of this and for being able to make these videotapes, and I hope that when you have an opportunity to see this, that it'll be something that will be helpful for you. This is part of a year-long series for 2023 coming from Silver Bay, and the title of it is Making the Most of This Precious Life. And the theme of this and the purpose beyond this is that this life we've been given is such a gift. And so how do we make the most of this gift of life that we've been given? And that's again the theme for this year. We're doing 2 programs a month. Each program is about 35 or 40 minutes or so, and they're all designed to help us achieve making the most of this beautiful life that we've been given. And I very much enjoy talking about this because I feel so hopeful around. I know there's lots of things going on in the world right now, but I'm so hopeful because we have the ability as human beings to create and to be able to bring about and to do some inner work and to be more aware of what brings us joy, what brings us contentment, what brings us an inner sense of peace, what brings us the ability to experience life to the full. And so that's what this series is about. And again, I'm grateful for Austin to be a part of this whole year and the opportunity to bring this to you from the Trinity Library today. What we're going to talk about today is really 2 sessions, this session and the next session. They go together. The topic we're working with is becoming our truest self and not being our false self that way. So true self, false self, growing into wholeness. And the idea of becoming more our true self helps us to work towards becoming more whole as human beings that way, more content, more, I think, appreciative of life, living with more gratitude, living with more generosity, living with a greater sense of inner joy. And so the first program, what we're doing today, is on the false self, and the next program that will be shown will be on the true self. And I hope you can be able to see both of these. They'll be shown at different times, but they very much go together. And so today we're focusing on this first part of understanding this journey to becoming our truest self. And there's a lot in the literature about growing into our truest self. Carl Jung, Richard Rohr, Robert Johnson, many authors and writers, both out of the psychological field and the spiritual field, have written about deepening in our spiritual journey there, and that this journey allows us to become more the women and the men we were created to be. And so that's this idea of true self and false self. And I have quite a bit to say about it. Again, the idea that true self, understanding our true self, other ways of talking about true self, and I'm just going to introduce this briefly so we get a chance to contrast it with the false self. But another way of thinking about the true self is our best self, or our real self, or our whole self, or our natural self, or our higher self, or our authentic self. That's what we're talking about when we talk about true self. And so we will get into that more in the second session that we're going to do on this topic. But the journey to becoming our true self goes through this process of understanding our false self. And so the first step in this process is being aware of our false self and understanding what the false self is and how we can come to be aware more of the false self and what that false self is about and the opportunity that we have to work through that. But as always, before we dive into fully this topic, we always like to do a centering exercise. And so the centering exercise helps ground us and brings us into a sense of calm. And by doing that, I think we're able to absorb the material more. So I'm going to step over here and invite you too, wherever you may be, to find a comfortable chair that you can sit in. And we're just going to do a short centering exercise that's designed to sort of quiet us down and then to be able to absorb the material that we're talking about today. So what we're going to do is a short exercise around sort of centering prayer, or we might call it sort of meditation. And what we do is we make sure we're sitting comfortably in the chair, our feet flat on the floor, and just letting ourselves take a few deep breaths just to bring ourselves to the presence, and again feeling the support of the chair and the floor. And as we enter this exercise of centering prayer, what we're going to do is we're just going to follow our breath. And before we do that, we'll do a relaxation piece where we feel our feet and letting go of any tension we have down in our feet and our lower legs that way. And if you feel tension there, you just let that tension go. And then we move up into our knees, into our thighs. And if we feel any tension there, just let that tension go. And as we move up our body into our torso area, into our hips, lower back, allowing ourselves to let that tension go, and again, to relax into the chair. And then as we move further up our body into our shoulders and into our arms, again, letting any tension that we might be holding there, letting that tension go. And then we'd move up into our neck area and into our head, and just making sure that we're not holding tension there. A common place for many people is to hold tension in their neck area. And so to really be aware and to allow yourself just to feel, am I holding any tension in my neck? And then again, letting our body relax. And then we're going to follow our breaths just for a few minutes. The way we do this is that we're aware of our inhalation, and then we're aware of when we exhale. And as we exhale, we'll just say a mantra word to ourselves, a word that is centering and grounding and comforting for us. It might be love or peace or joy or heart, whatever word you choose. You just, in your mind's eye, say that word as you exhale. So let us practice this together. And you may find as you do this that thoughts come into your mind. Just acknowledge that thought and let it go and go back to concentrating on your breath. So let us do this together. I invite you to close your eyes, and we'll take a nice inhale and then exhale. And as we exhale, just saying our mantra word, I'm going to use the word love. And inhale. And exhale. And inhale. And exhale. And again, all the time we're sort of focusing on our breath, in and out, and saying our word. So let us just quietly do this for a few minutes together, a few breaths. So I hope you are able to do those breaths together and to feel the relaxation that comes in doing this. And I would hope that you might choose to do this on a regular basis as a way of sort of centering yourself and feeling a sense of calm and presence about your life. And I think a daily spiritual practice like this is so conducive to good health and a sense of living an abundant life, sense of living a life that we really can appreciate the preciousness of the gift of life that we have. So thank you for joining in this, and we'll continue with our program now. So again, our program is about true self or false self, and we're going to start with the false self, as this is where we need to begin if we're going to work towards living into our truer selves that way. And so when we think about doing this kind of work, thinking about our false self, and I'm going to sort of get into this in a few minutes later, but this is not a negative. I don't want us to come away thinking that something's wrong with us or judging ourselves or being self-critical at all. The idea, we all have a false self, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm just wanting to be encouraging about doing this work. But it does require some intention to do what we call inner work, looking at true self and false self that way. And we're facing some of the more challenging parts of our life, so our own brokenness, our own woundedness, maybe early life experiences that were somewhat affecting us that way, that we felt hurt or somehow abandoned or somehow not supported that way. We end up sort of facing some truth about ourselves, some of our neuroses, some of our deep sadness that way. So it is challenging. I want to really say that it's okay to do this, and you want to be a little careful in terms of supporting yourself around this, or maybe talking to somebody about it in that way. But I'm encouraging the idea that this self-reflection and awareness helps us understand where am I holding on to some of this false self, and how can I continue to grow into being the person that I was created to be. And so the idea of false self is that, let me just cover a few topics briefly here. We all have a false self. It's all part of every one of us. Every human being has a false self. That way, we develop a false self to sort of cope with life that way, to what was expected for us as growing up as children. So we all have a false self, and it's okay. The idea is that we don't want to judge ourselves around this false self, or be critical of ourselves, or it's somehow think that it's really a negative aspect of us. It's not. It's real, and it's part of us, and it's something that we can come to understand and come to become more our truest self that way. And we're all working on this process from more of a false self to more of a true self. It's going on all the time in our life. What I'm doing today is to sort of call attention to it and to think intentionally about how we can deepen in our life journey to come to appreciate our life more by doing this kind of inner work. And so, again, this first session devoted to the false self that way, and it's in some ways easy to think about this false self again in a negative way, and I don't want us to do that. I want us to hold this in a sense of wholeness and goodness, and the opportunity that we can work through our false self is a real opportunity for us that way, and it can be a really helpful thing for us. And so I would, maybe the word welcoming is too strong, but to welcome the opportunity to take a look at our false self that way. Again, our truest self is where we want to be and what we want to grow into. But I believe in some ways that we really can do this work, and I'm so hopeful around our creativity and our courage and our wisdom and our insight to be able to do this kind of work. And so understanding and embracing our false self is a really positive opportunity for us that way. It's an opportunity to accept ourselves and to love ourselves and to see ourselves as people who are growing and learning and improving and deepening and evolving into being a more whole person that way. A person that has an experience of real inner joy. We're evolving again into becoming our more truest self. Sometimes we say you can never leave a place that you've never been. And so the idea is we can't really leave the false self until we come to understand it and be aware of it and then know it well enough to leave it that way. And so to embrace our false self, again, is an opportunity for us as these incredibly beautiful human beings that we are to become more our truest self. And the attitude, again, that I would like to offer here is an attitude of really feeling grateful for the opportunity to grow into a better self. And this wholeness-making process that we talk about, growing into wholeness, this process of embracing where we now are and working at welcoming the opportunities to become more who we would like to become and to grow into that way. And I don't think it makes any difference where we are in our life stage, whether we're younger or middle age or a little bit older or beyond midlife or even in our elderly years. There is always an opportunity to do this kind of work. And I really, again, I'm a big proponent of doing this because in some ways I want to be the best person that I can be, and I hope you do too. And to be that person for life and for work and for loved ones and for friends and for the way that we are in our life. And so the idea is that we're doing this work to kind of contribute to the greater whole and to have a positive effect on the world around us that way. Again, we all have a false self. It's part of being human. And we'll always have at some level parts of us that are a false self. It's part of being human that way. We're never perfect that way. And this is, again, a lifelong journey for us to continue to grow into our whole self. And it does take this commitment on our part to look at ourselves. And again, we don't want to judge ourselves or be critical of ourselves in this process. We embrace the opportunity to look at our false self. And yes, this is who I am. I have these parts of me, false self. This is who I am, my warts and all, and I can take a look at it, not judge it, and say, I want to continue on this journey to be my truest self or truer self. And I embrace that opportunity, hopefully with openness and courage and insight and discernment. And so the journey begins with this idea of, again, self-reflection and openness and vulnerability and honesty that way. And as I said earlier, facing and embracing our brokenness, our own early life experiences, other things maybe that happened to us, regrets, failures. These are important parts of welcoming this journey from false self to a more truer self. So what does a false self actually look like? Well, other words, I want to just put in words to kind of fill in the idea of false self. Maybe it's our fake self or our pretend self or our trying to look better self or my insecure self or pleasing others self or conflict avoidance self or my persona self. The persona means that kind of I'm trying to project to the world the way that I think you want me to be, the way that I think the world will accept me. And so I might be violating who I really am by trying to be somebody that you will like that way. That's the persona. The person that I show the world is different than the person that's going on inside of me. Carl Rogers, founder of client-centered therapy, had a great definition for sort of wholeness that way, or more healthy beingness. He said the less incongruence there is between what is going on outside of you than what is going on inside of you, you're healthier. The more there is a big difference between what I'm showing you and what's going on inside of me, portends that I'm not as healthy as I would like to be that way. So that's the way he defined it. But this idea, again, of what does a false self look like? Trying to prove myself, telling little white lies to try to protect myself. My low self-esteem is out of a sort of a false self that way. My victim self, my pretense, I have a pretense about me, or I have an elitist self, I'm trying to prove that somehow I'm better than I am that way, or my secret self, I have this secret life going on in that way. These are all parts of this sort of false self. And another way to look at it is, how does the false self get played out in practical ways? How does the false self show up in our life? Well, it might be my complaining self. I'm always complaining about things. Or my negative self. I'm always looking at things through a negative lens that way. Or the poor me self that way. My impatience self. I'm impatient. Or my worry self, that I'm always worrying. What goes along with worry is I feel stressed all the time, or I'm anxious all the time, or find myself fairly angry a lot that way, or more I'm frustrated, and myself is sort of this sort of frustrated way of being, or my struggling self. Or another way of understanding false self, or the way it plays out in our life, is my addictive self. I tend to get addicted to things that way, my addictions, or my self-centered self, or my ego-driven self, or my stingy self. I'm always holding on to things that way, or my closed self, or my passive-aggressive self. I know I've given you lots of sort of ideas there, but this is sort of how the false self gets played out in life that way. And these things that I described to you, I have a lot of these things. We all do. So don't worry, don't be concerned. It's part of this process of growing into our full self that way. So this false self, this awareness, is an opportunity to grow into a sort of a false selfness. I don't know if I've made up a new word, but we grow through this false selfness and become more conscious of what might be going on unconsciously for us that holds us in these patterns that I've talked about, in this behavior. So why am I getting so angry, or why am I so anxious all the time, or why am I ego-driven, or why do I need to keep proving myself, or why do I need to keep showing off, or why do I need to keep being so stingy or closed, or why am I passive-aggressive? Let me be more aware of those behaviors so I can begin to address them that way. Another way of understanding our false self is through the concept of complexes. Now, complexes come out of the Carl Jung world. Carl Jung, great Swiss psychologist who developed analytic psychology, he coined the word complex. And a complex, it's a little hard to understand, but let me try to help here. A complex is an unconscious, we're not aware of it, unconscious organized set of memories, associations, fantasies, expectations, and behavior patterns or tendencies around sort of a core element. So we can have a complex around different parts of our life that way. There are many different complexes, but let me give you a few examples that we can work through to become more our true self. One's called the persecution complex. What does that mean? Well, the persecution complex that I might have is everyone is out to harm me, and then they in a way, by harming me, they'll be better that way. They'll somehow achieve more that way by somehow holding me back. That's a persecution complex. Then there's an inferiority complex, that I feel unworthy, less capable than another person that way. Or a superior complex, that I'm better than others. Or an abandonment complex, that people are going to leave me and I'll be alone. Or there's what's called a God complex, where one believes that they have more sort of godlike powers that way. Or a guilt complex. They always blame themselves for everything that goes wrong. Or a martyr complex, where one gains sympathy and attention through suffering. Then there's the power complex, where we feel power to compensate feelings of inferiority. So we're always trying to attain more power that way. And there are other complexes too. There's a money complex where we're overly conscious about money and feel that money is sort of so important to us that way. So these are examples of many other complexes that exist that way. And these complexes can show up through two different aspects of our personality, of who we are, of our personhood. But let me just say, again, we all have some of these complexes. So as I read these and you feel like, oh, I think I have that. Well, I think I have that. Don't worry. We've all got a lot of these, okay? And so the idea is to be more aware of them so we can turn the dial down on them and not have them have such an impact on our life in that way. So these complexes can show up in two different ways in our life, in our personhood. One is what I talked about before a little earlier, called the persona. And the persona is this outward appearance and how we want others to see us. My persona is, I want you to see me as this really nice guy. I want you to see me as this wonderful, compassionate man that way, and that's what I'll show you. But then that's the persona. Now, the other side of me, sometimes I get really angry, and sometimes I get really upset, and sometimes I'm really not a very nice guy at all. That's part of me too, and I want to look at both of those. So the persona sometimes is, it takes so much energy for us to keep the persona going, that we're sort of living not sort of with a full sense of integrity, because I got this other stuff going on over here that way. The idea of becoming our true self is to take this stuff out and to work on it and take a look. Why am I getting so angry? Why am I drinking too much? Why am I avoiding this? Why can't I deal with conflict? Why do I feel like I'm going to be abandoned? All these different kind of complexes. So that's the first part in that way. And so we want to understand that this persona that we have excludes sort of our inner life. And it's all about trying to look good all the time. Well, if I'm trying to look good all the time, that's sort of my false self coming out. Because the truth is, I'm not good all the time. Let me be more real all the time. And the second part of this idea of how complexes can show up is through our shadow side. And we've done a few programs on shadow. If you've been with us throughout the series, you'll remember there's a couple of programs we did on shadow. And those are the parts of our personality that we're not really fully aware of. And they're aspects of ourselves that we're not that proud of in that way, and that we want to be able to look at our shadow side. And again, our shadow side can be, well, why am I sometimes so greedy? Why am I so greedy? Why do I hoard? Or why do I get so impatient with people? Or why am I yelling so much? Or whatever. That can be our shadow side that you take a look at. So this sort of brings us to the close of this session on false self. And I hope today, by focusing on this, it helps you a little bit understand what might be going on for you, what's going on for me in that way. And it might be helpful in beginning to be more aware of our false self, so we can then begin to work on it some. And so I certainly hope in our next session you can be with us when we focus on our true self. In some ways, I feel a little guilty by leaving you here with the false self, and hope that you can tap into the next program that we're going to offer, the true self, because these two together make a whole that way. And again, I just want to emphasize, we all have a false self. I don't want you to go away from this program worrying about it. Oh, I got this, or I got that, whatever. We all do, and we're all working at it in some way to become better human beings. And I so respect your willingness to sort of take a look at this material. So again, I hope you can be with us on the next session that we'll have together. Thank you for being with us today. I wish you well. Take care. Bye now.